Since I made a movie about him in 2010, the great Don Colley has had a knack for telling me about other artists who need to be documented. I made a movie about Matthew McGough, a gifted but troubled artist who died young, and another one about H.D. Ivey, a terrific sculptor obsessed with nuclear Armageddon. This spring, Don told me about a friend of his from Pittsburgh named Nick Bubash. Nick started out as a tattoo artist, apprenticing in the 1970s to the legendary Thom deVita in the East Village of New York City. At Thom's suggestion, Nick went to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, where he added sculpture and printmaking to his already formidable drawing skills. My twin brother Jim lives near Pittsburgh, so when I was back for a visit in May, we went out to the city's Mexican War Streets neighborhood to meet the immensely talented Nick Bubash. I think you're going to like him as much as we did. So a big thank you once again to Don Colley. What kind of name is Bubash?
Bubash is Croatian. My father was Croatian, not 100% because my grandmother was Czech. They were dirt farmers, and then my grandfather became a butcher, my father became a butcher, and for some reason he was born with a giant brain. He went through school sideways. He wound up studying microbiology, and when he was getting his master's degree, he started working for Jonas Salk. He was actually the first scientist that Jonas Salk hired for the polio vaccine when he set up the project here in Pittsburgh. There were 7 different programs running in the country because Roosevelt had polio. So the guy in the middle is Salk, the guy on the right is my dad.
And how did he meet a nice Sicilian girl?
Yeah, I can't tell you. I know they both went to Penn State. My mother went briefly, and my father graduated from Penn State. And I know my mother's brother went to Penn State, my uncle, because his mother wouldn't let him go to Juilliard. He was a violinist. And Juilliard was just too far away, so he wound up going to Penn State, for Christ's sake. There's Millie. My mother was an artist, so I was raised as an artist. She saw that I had a natural inclination to draw because I was always drawing. I was also dyslexic, which I think caused me to express myself in drawing because I couldn't do it in writing. Fortunately, you grow out of that stuff as the years go by, but it does help your art because, as far as I understand it, dyslexia is like seeing flat things in 3 dimensions. Actually, I became primarily, I think, a sculptor is really my forte. When I did go to the academy, which was much later in life, never knew I was a sculptor, put me in front of a piece of clay, and I could make something out of it. Just like that, it was just that easy. Of course, you have to work at it to get good at it. I'm not Michelangelo. She sent me to Saturday morning classes. Her mantra used to be, if you can't draw, you can't be in the club. That's what she used to tell me. Oh, I got to learn how to draw. I want to be in the club, because she drew beautifully. But her main interest was in entertaining, and she would lecture on everything from boxing to unisex to politics, but her forte was the history of fashion. She had a show that she had for almost 35 years. She took around the eastern part of the country and even had an opportunity to go on Broadway at the age of 60. She stopped doing it when her roadie died, who was my father. I can't remember not drawing. As I say, I learned to draw at my mother's knee, and to this day, I can draw a really good woman's knee. After I got out of high school, I went to Penn State for a couple of years. I studied art. They didn't have much of an art program there. I also studied philosophy, which after about 1 year of studying philosophy, I realized I'm not going to study philosophy. I used to have to read these things 3 times before I could understand them. I quit Penn State after about 1.5 years, and that was during the Woodstock time. I moved to New York City to become an artist. One of the very first jobs I got there was with the Peter Max Enterprise Studio. He was a very popular commercial artist at the time. I didn't particularly care for what he was doing, but I mean, it was really a neat job to have because it was around a bunch of artists. Shortly thereafter, in the very early 70s, I met a guy by the name of Thom deVita. I went to get a tattoo. Going in and seeing deVita's studio was an eye-opener for me. It was like going to Mecca. The whole place was just one big piece of art, including him. I mean, the tattoos just came off the floor and right up onto his body, up to the top of his head. And then they kept going onto the ceiling. The whole place was art. And I was home. And he tattooed me. Shortly thereafter, I brought him a bunch of drawings of dragons that I had done. Actually, I had gone home and did the drawings of dragons and brought them back to kind of impress him, and they did impress him. And he told me that I could come back there anytime I wanted to. So I started an apprenticeship at deVita's studio. At the time, it wasn't called an apprenticeship. You were allowed to hang around there. So I hung around there for about 5 years, and I learned everything I could learn from him. And I learned how to tattoo, and I opened my first tattoo shop in the Chelsea Hotel in about 1973. I tattooed there briefly. I remember deVita telling me, you have to move out of New York. The place isn't big enough for the two of us. So lo and behold, I met a beautiful girl. And she was from Pittsburgh, and she wanted to go to Duquesne University to get her law degree. So we moved back to Pittsburgh, where I opened my first tattoo shop in 1976 in McKees Rocks. And I had that place for maybe about 8 years when finally I decided it was time to go back to school. Now, Thom deVita constantly urged me to go back to school and get a formal education. He had never had a formal education. He didn't hammer it home all the time, but it was always one of those things like your mother does once in a while. She mentions it to you, so like it's in the back of your mind all the time because she continues to keep it alive. Thom deVita was a person who took everything into consideration and used as much of what he could from not only objects and different mediums, but he also used things from different cultures in his works of art. You'd see things from China, or from Japan, or Puerto Rico, or Americana, or like old buildings. Or, for example, this thing came off of a stone that fell off of a frieze of a building across the street from his house. This design was on that piece of stone. And he brought it back to his house. He made an ink sketch of it and printed it, and then he tattooed it on my arm. In 1982, I moved to Philadelphia to go back to school. My intention was to go to the Pennsylvania Academy because in 1982 it was much different than it is now. I mean, you go down there now, and they're putting bundles of strings on the wall and putting stuffed animals and stuff. Back in 82, I'm sure when you went too, I mean, it was all pretty much, everything was done by the figure. What did we draw? 8 hours a day for the first 2 years? When you weren't drawing from the figure, you were sculpting from the figure, or you were painting from the figures. I won a number of prizes while I was there. One of them was the award prize for sculpture. I had been doing large animal sculptures. I just got tired of doing humans, and then when I found out that all mammals are built the same, they're just shaped a little bit differently, I went into animals. Wow, it's just like doing a person, only it looks like a lion. We all have the same number of bones and the structure was the same, so it was kind of an easy transition for me to make. Plus then my father's influence, having been a microbiologist at Penn State, he was always involved with animals in one way or the other. So I think I had kind of an animal influence from my upbringing with him. And then I got tired of doing animals, so I started interchanging some of the parts of the animals with human parts, and then some parts I was putting like geometrical parts in, and I just started making my own kind of thing. And then I won one of the traveling grants, the Shite. The art that was going to influence what I was then doing personally was art that came from India. What the Indians had done for thousands of years was what I wanted to see, because that was talking to me more than anything. And I remember telling my mother, who was a Sicilian, that I was going to India, and she said, "What? India? What's wrong with Italy? The art is in Italy." I said, "Yeah, I know, Mom, but I want to go to India because there's." Oh my gosh, she couldn't believe it. It was like one of those things. I stayed there for 6 months. Had a great time in India. Great time. This thing I picked up in Trivandrum, India, when I went on my thing. That's Shiva. I don't know what the frog is. It's like, just a Buddhist frog.
Who made that?
I have no idea. I bought it at a junk shop. And these things are the Mexican Day of the Dead. There's the Venus de Milo. When I came back, I guess I had some choices. I could have stayed in Philadelphia, started a studio there, and got a job in a coffee shop, or whatever the hell it would have taken to keep me alive. Or I could have gone back and started tattooing. I wasn't getting rich on it, but I could make a living at it, and it was something I could do. So I did that. I moved from Philadelphia, moved back to Pittsburgh, started a studio of my own here, and I continued to tattoo, and I have been tattooing now for something like 47 years. I still tattoo maybe 2 days a week. The rest of the time I spend on my artwork. One of the things I found was that I was able to do everything. I wasn't able to just draw or just paint or just sculpt. I had a very influential teacher at the Academy, collected from the Louvre to the Museum of Modern Art and whatever. His name was Peter Payon, and he used to say to us, never left my mind, "What do you want to be known as? A painter, a graphic artist, a draftsman, a sculptor, or do you want to be known as an artist?" He said, "An artist does it all." And I took that to heart. Now I'm doing welding. Thom, deVita, my old tattoo mentor, he did assemblage. His assemblages were a great influence on me. I had 10,000 objects in it, the studio that I just sold, and I got rid of most of those objects. But over the years, as I was watching these objects, enamored with the idea of assemblage because of Thom, deVita, I started noticing that these objects would actually attract one another. There was actual physical attraction of objects to one another. So I began to put them together into assemblages. And what I called it was the natural order of things, because there is a natural order of things. There's also chaos, there's all kinds of stuff. I had thrown away a bunch of things and it was in the garbage can, and I started pulling them out of the garbage can, and I constructed that out of it. And it just came together, like it was just a person. I didn't realize that, until I had started pulling them out of the garbage can. I thought, well, wait a minute, this might work here. And look at, this goes here. Next thing you know, I had a human. Of course, it just doesn't fall together. You have to work on it. Like some of this stuff works, some of it doesn't. Now that you're looking for it, you're guessing, it's work. It's work. You have to find what works with what best. This thing took me several months to do. I tore this thing apart and put it back together over and over and over again. And I kept winding up with a pile of junk until finally it started to come together. And that's when I began to discover the natural order of how these things should be arranged. The idea of adding and subtracting things just like you would do with even drawing or painting. Same things with objects, and it's just as difficult. Just as difficult to do. I have art shows regularly. I had one in Chicago in June. I'm in a show right now in Seattle. I had a solo show at the Warhol Museum in 2013. 31 assemblages in them. They all had tongue-in-cheek titles to them. I try to, when I can, bring a sense of humor into my work. In Asshat Man, you put a little question on a piece of paper and you put it in the middle, and then you swing the pendulum and it doesn't answer the question. This is called Mrs. Brancusi. That's what she looked like. His wife was really his inspiration. They say there's always a good woman behind a great man, you know.
One of my favorites of Nick's imaginative creatures is the Vark, part vulture and part shark. Nick hopes his Vark replaces the eagle as our national symbol. The new motto being, "We fly around the world, attacking sovereign countries."
I call them Crucifixion by Addiction. I did a number of them. I did one on sex, one on gambling, one on food, one on drinking.
Do you have the sex one?
I don't have any of them anymore. They're all gone.
Except the gambling one.
As a matter of fact, this one belonged to a friend of mine who I had given because he was fighting an addiction problem, and he kept breaking it. And the fourth time he broke it, I didn't give it back to him.
The idea of addiction is not just an artistic subject for Nick. For 14 years, he was addicted to alcohol and heroin. His mentor, Thom deVita, never harped on Nick's addiction, but simply told him, "That's your penitentiary. When you're ready to get out of it, you will." On August 12th, Nick will have stayed clean for 35 years. He wants people to know that with help, you can recover and have a wonderful life.
I learned to do all these figural things. I learned to draw the figure. I learned to sculpt the figure. It took years to learn how to do this well. Why would I give it up? This is one of the little demons that I was commissioned to doing. The names of these things are called apple triches. The woman who is commissioning me to do them, her grandfather used to tell them as children that these apple triches lived in the basement under the steps. And he just gave them vague descriptions of them, but he said, like, if you go downstairs, these things are gonna come out from under the steps and like bite you in the legs and bite your ankles and say, he probably had a still down there or something, I imagine. Something was going on, but they kept them out of the basement, that's for sure. These people are very liberal, they're very beautiful and kind, and they've given me carte blanche.
How many of them are you gonna do?
Well, I'm supposed to do 7. That's the wax. First they make the clay, then they make the wax out of the clay, they make molds. Whenever they do the wax, I get on and I work on the wax. And then after they get done working on the wax, I get on and I work on the bronze. I make sure that everything is just the way it should be, you know, like if they have to grind some things off, or I want to be in control of what kind of patina it gets. In the wax, I can still remodel things that need to be fixed.
Do you have models posing for you? Or
No, the female one I did. I hired a middle-aged woman to model for me because I wanted a body with some character to it that had lived. These things I generally just make up out of books and Like, look at the anatomy charts, and you know how we studied at PAFA. Geez, I mean, every day. And it got to a point where you didn't need to look at a model to draw a figure. I didn't need to look at anything. I just close my eyes and imagine it and then draw it,
Man, this is a beautiful house.
I paid $10,000 for the house. It was completely trashed. There was no anything in it, no pipes, no electricity. All the steps were bowed. There was no third floor. It took better than a year to put it into just the condition that we could actually move into. And of course, the backyard was a junk heap. There was washing machines. People used it to just dump stuff. So we had all that taken out of there. Within the first year, there were 8 murders within 1 block of my house. And I moved here with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. In fact, I remember my father-in-law saying he had a machine gun if I wanted to build a little parapet on top of the house. Actually, when we were constructing the house, the police asked if they could set up surveillance cameras in the bedroom so they could shoot up the alley and watch the drug deals going on up there. It was crazy here, man. I didn't want to move here, but my ex-wife saw the potential in it. Fortunately, she did, so we wound up moving here. But since then, maybe every house in this block has been gentrified in the past 20 years. We are fortunate enough to live in the same neighborhood as the mattress factory, which was there like 20 years before I got here, I think. Barbara Ludorowski built that place and has turned it into a dynasty. They have revolving shows going on there. They have permanent things going on there. I've had a couple of different shows down there. One show where I demonstrated tattooing.
As an artist, how has living in Pittsburgh affected you? Has it been a pretty cool place?
Pittsburgh's a beautiful city, and there's a lot of great things here, and they have great museums, so I've had access to be able to see great art. But in terms of how it's affected my art, I've almost made it a point to go elsewhere to other art communities to participate in, chiefly Chicago. I was in a show there in 1991 called I Tattooed America, and it was really the first show of its type. It was put together by Ed Hardy. It was tattoo artists who were also fine artists, and they were damn good artists too. After that show, I got hooked up with people there in Chicago, and I just never stopped going back.
The world of tattooing is often very collaborative. Tattooers often use designs, or flash, which were created by other people. Nick told me that much of the basic flash that Thom deVita used was drawn by his friend Freddie Clouston. In these pictures, Nick did the drawing, but the coloring was done by his friend Craig Helmich. In his fine art, Nick has also collaborated with friends like the artist Robert Qualters. They passed some paintings back and forth, with the rule being that you couldn't complain whatever the other guy did to it. And sometimes Nick gets art from unknown artists and paints right on top of them. But the most important collaboration Nick has ever done was to create a book in 2003 with his fellow tattooers for the purpose of honoring and raising money for Thom deVita.
And I worked with him. I designed the catches and all those kind of things. He put the decorations on. And these are the artists that were involved in them. Teddy Varndell, Ed Hardy, me, Michael Malone, who's now dead, Scott Harrison, and John Wyatt, who's a photographer in New Jersey. And all of these signatures, except for mine, are forged. We forged every damn one of them. Because how could you get a hold of them?
Yeah.
You had to do something. And none of these guys gave it to me. It's not like they cared,
Nick oversaw the production of 32 copies of Thom deVita Unauthorized. Did the book sell?
Like this.
Wow.
I have 2 of them, and Thom kept 2 of them, so we sold 28 of them.
The books that Nick sold each had 4 original drawings and 5 lithographs by Thom deVita, photographs by John Wyatt and Mike Malone, plus 1 signed lithograph and an essay by each of the other artists.
I wrote the introduction. Here's the piece I did. This was the frontispiece. Here's Ed Hardy, who's like guru of tattooing in the world. All the pieces that were in the books I sent to them and had them signed. The original photograph by Michael Malone, which really became an iconic photograph. I mean, that was on magazine covers and people who knew it. Now, deVita set the shot up, but he shot this, I think, somewhere around 1974. That's Thom deVita when he was a young man. He was probably about 35 there. The tattoo is by Huck Spaulding. That's also a photograph of Thom deVita by John Wyatt.
Wow.
Now, he was way ahead of his time. That was like 50 years ago. The idea of the book was to make him some money because he was so goddamn poor. I mean, he was my teacher. I owed him. And I figured I would never, ever be able to repay the debt. I sold the initial ones to get money just to make the book for $400 to $600, and we sold the last ones for like $900 to $1,000. But then they did that Vice video, and deVita and all of his contributions, which were extremely significant, went viral. And everybody in the world knows who he is and know that he was a great innovator. But before that Vice video, nobody knew who the hell he was, just the inner circle. And now they're literally priceless. 1.5 years to make this. After all the work that I went through, like I had to drive to his house 6 hours each way. I drove there, I think I counted 10 different times. It cost $15,000 to make these 32 books. And once I got all the $15,000 paid off of with credit card, there was a profit of $7,000 after 2 years of work. But at least I was able to give him $7,000.
Yeah.
I didn't keep a dime, nothing. He never asked anything of you. And I was his only protege. I was the only guy that ever worked with him. He was a very private guy.
Nick told me that his personal copy of the book contained a lot more of Thom deVita's own work than did the 28 copies that were sold.
This one that I have is not like the regular ones. Mine is like loaded with stuff. He would send you these little things, he'd put stamps on them and birds and everything. And I said, what are these? And he says, they're goodies, man. Put them in the portfolio. They're goodies. I said, oh, well, yeah, I never thought of that. I don't know why. A lot of this is hand-drawn, stenciled, hand-drawn, stamped. And he was also became a devout Roman Catholic later in his life. So this is one of the advertisements I did for my 7 Deadly Sins. So he took them and he put Jesus's over them, over my advertisements. That's greed. This was sloth. He painted Jesus's over the top of them, And you'll see he'll repeat things a lot of times like we all do,
He drew that, or was that a photographer?
No, this is a mimeographed photograph, and he transferred it. Don't ask me how. I know he didn't go to Kinko's. I can tell you that. And that's one of his New Year's cards. That was him when he was a kid during his baptism. He used to send out a New Year's card years and years and years ago before he became a religious Catholic. And this was one of the ones that he made later in his life. He was an artist model. He did artist modeling.
Who's this guy?
That's Thom deVita.
Oh, self-portrait. Oh, wow, what a style. And that's...
Some guy he tattooed that he took a picture of that he incorporated in the design. And this is a picture of him sitting in the corner of his room, and that picture is by John Wyatt. He just died a month ago, maybe.
Oh, boy. That must have been sad.
Oh, I was sitting there with him a week before he died, and I said, I've known you 48 years. He had Parkinson's. As sick as he was and as close to death as he was when I first got there, I put my hands on his old soft hands. I said, how you doing, old man? And he said, how old do you think I am? I said, 46? He said, I'm 45. He still had a sense of humor. This is the kind of guy he was.
How old was he?
He was 85, almost 86. He wanted to get to 86, but he didn't get there. He was about a month short.
Nick's devotion to his mentor is also clear in a remarkable group of collaborative images from the 1990s that were signed by both men. Nick Bubash is just shy of 70 and has been doing his work a long time, but he is finally being recognized for his contributions to our culture.
Won an ACR award 2 years ago in New York City for avant-garde thinking, people that have added to the culture in an avant-garde way. And since I had started tattooing, which when I started, when I was 19 years old, it was extremely unpopular. It was taboo. So they gave me the award for that, for being one of the first guys, the tipping point guys, to help start this, what is now like a massive phenomenon. Everybody in the damn world was doing it. We used to sit for weeks, wait for somebody to come through the door.
I emailed Nick this New York Times article about an East Village tattoo shop that now charges tens of thousands of dollars. He laughed and told me that Thom deVita charged $30 and told Nick that he could only charge $20 and not to raise his fee until he was really, really good.
One of the qualities that I insist on is that I want it to be beautiful. There has to be some beauty involved in it. I want it to be harmonious, something that's pleasurable to look at. I just keep changing subjects and I keep changing styles. But I think if you put all my art together in one room, you would see a common thread run through it.
Though I'm not a tattoo kind of guy myself, I've thoroughly enjoyed working on this movie about Nick. What's the oddest thing you ever tattooed?
The oddest thing, let me think. I tattooed holes on a guy's head to make it look like a bowling ball one time.
Nick, after studying your art for weeks, I'm quite sure that Millie will let you into the art club. Here's a small clarification for my viewers who did not have the good sense of growing up near Pittsburgh. What you barbarians call soda is actually known as pop.
I was tattooing orange because I was doing some orange lilies and I was drinking orange pop. I had the two cups beside each other and I thought, don't drink the orange one with the blood in it. And don't you know I did. I took a big gulp out of it. Fortunately, it was my friend Bill, and I had known him since I was a kid. I figured, he wasn't gonna kill me. But